This is podcast 2.2 with Alan. Again, Alan, welcome back.
Hi, Austin.
Well, it's Sunday night, and so first time recording Sunday night. We're looking into the new work week. How are you feeling?
Feeling pretty good about it, I guess, or pretty okay, I should say. I feel like there's not really, I never feel like too good about the work week anymore, but I never feel too bad either, so too
Did
okay.
you
What
did
about
you
you?
feel that during school? Because like for me, I always was like, oh, start of another week, the end of freedom or something like that. But how about you? How do you is it different than school, like work?
I feel like for school, it's kind of weird in that I was able to look forward to the breaks or like for like the big finals, midterms for those big events to be over. And then like, it's like a cycle. It's like a sine wave. You
Mm,
stress and then you're relaxed and you're stressed. And then for work, it's a lot more flat. And then there are no
mm.
breaks. And so it's a different type of feeling for me. It's like it's not any harder, I would say, but it's just more flat. Yeah.
Monotone.
Yeah.
I kind of get that. If you don't do anything outside of your work life, it just seems like a repeat. It's
Hmm.
like same as yesterday or same as last week or possibly the same going forward. But you've done
Hmm.
something special, and I've been trying to do a podcast with you since like I don't know, like 3 weeks ago. You went on
Hmm.
two Go tournaments, weekend back to back. And so, why don't you talk a little about the first one, second one, how they went, and yeah.
Yeah. Did go on to go tournaments. This was about a month ago. A month and a half ago, I think. Remember the first week of April about was when the second one was. First one was in New York City, was near the end of March. And yeah, just kind of glad to be able to play again in person. I feel like the biggest reason why I was like happy with going is not even for the go. It's just that like there's so few events that happen in person, and it's always nice to,
Right.
attend an in-person event, get some actual face-to-face interaction.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and both of them went pretty much as expected. These are relatively small tournaments. I got third and second respectively, but these are kind of like local tournaments, so it's not like nationwide. It's like New York. Second one was in DC, but my family was planning on taking a trip down to see the cherry blossoms anyway. So we kind of decided to take the trip down the weekend of the tournament just so it's nice that we get kind of kill two birds with one stone.
What's the
Yeah.
gotcha? So the one in New York and the one in DC, how many people about were in each of the tournaments?
I just think like 70 and 60 or so. It's always broken down into divisions. So generally like each division has like probably 10 or even like fewer, I guess, people.
Gotcha.
Because like I say like 60 or 70, but like that's spread like the amount of like the range that Go ratings encompass is like massive.
Mm.
So it's like a huge range, which is why they need to break it up into so many divisions.
So what range are you then? Or is this a
Uh,
complex system?
so the system goes, it's like starts it's actually so weird. I don't know why they don't just have a number that goes up. The worst you can be is around like 30Q. Then as you get better, the number goes lower. So 29Q is better than 30Q, 20Q is better than that, and then 1Q is better than 30Q. And then after that, it gets into the dawn rankings. And so one dawn is better than all the Qs, and then two dawn, and then essentially it kind of there's not
Inversely.
really an upper bound. Like nine down is technically the upper bound, but the AGA, American Go Association, does it kind of like statistically, like if you just keep beating like nine downs, you're just going to be 10 and then 11, 12. If you just win all your games, there's essentially no upper bound, but supposedly nine is supposed to be the upper bound. I'm like, 7.4 right now.
Wow, 7.4 Don.
Yeah. So
Gotcha.
rating wise, that would pretty much always be in the top division, but it's just depending on the size of the tournament, it might be like average within the top division for local tournaments. Usually it's slightly above average in the top division, but usually I'm never the top rated. Usually like I'm like maybe like third or so, which kind of fits into, my results were as expected.
Right. Now I know that you also like playing chess. Do you have a ranking there too, or are you playing tournaments, or that's
I've
less active and Go?
I've only ever played two tournaments. That was for Rutgers. It was like team tournaments for Rutgers. Like I
Mm,
was part of the Rutgers team facing against other teams.
mm,
I'm definitely a lot less active. I'm around like 2000 USCF. It's actually kind of funny why I started playing chess, or not really started, but like why I got more into chess is mainly because like at Rutgers, there's like not really a Go club with like strong players. And
mm,
so essentially if I go to the Go club, it's just for the social aspect. Like I can't really go to the Go club and compete because on average, like the best player is maybe like 2-3Q.
uh-huh.
So you can think of that in terms of the rating system. And it's like it's not really fun competing
Mm,
sometimes.
mm.
So I only go there for like the social
Talk with
aspect. And then
people,
for
right?
chess, it was like, okay, I can like try and
Game face on.
climb up, because as a freshman, I definitely was not like anywhere near like the the best chess player at Rutgers. So
Mm,
I kind of was like, all right, let me start to grind.
gotcha, gotcha.
I feel
Now,
like, yeah, this type of like game though, like Go chess, perfect information game, this is kind of my domain.
so I was just about to ask, do these games stimulate your mind more so than like work, or is this like what makes your brain grow a bit or excites it?
Probably, I would say definitely more so than work. Because work, it's like it's hard, but it's like not stimulate your brain type hard. It's really weird to
Mm,
describe for me. Like Go and chess and any type of math or coding problem, coding as in like algorithmic problem,
mm,
it's very problem solving. Whereas like a lot of work, you've worked with a website, right? You can't
yes.
really like think really hard on how to, let's say I have to like center this like image, or
Mm,
like, oh, we have to remember like create the two columns of videos. It's like sometimes the CSS just doesn't work and you're just like trying out things. It's not like the same type of problem solving feel.
mm. It's routine too sometimes, right? It's like a similar process, and then once you get stuck, usually you have to like Google it, try to figure it out. I guess that's the non-routine part, but it's not that like as problem solving, or I know I kind of know what you're describing, but I can't describe it either. That problem
Mhm.
solving feel you get in school, right?
Yeah.
Now, something you said about Go and chess, you said it's perfect information games,
Yeah.
right? So can you explain a little bit what that means for those who
So
are listening?
perfect information essentially means all the information that captures the state of the game is available to both players, and
Mm,
there is no randomness involved. So in chess, the state of the game is literally the positioning of all the pieces, plus some like information like can white castle, can black castle. But essentially, that's available to the players right in front of them. A game like, I don't know, any first person shooter game,
mm,
um, that's not perfect information. You don't know where all your opponents are on the map.
mm.
Um, Poker is not a perfect information game because,
Settlers of Catan.
yeah, that too, that has like a randomness involved. You
Mm,
have dice. Poker, you don't know the cards of
mm,
your opponent. Um, so that's a perfect information game is like, you know everything, your opponent knows everything,
mm.
but you just have to like out strategize your opponent.
Understood. For me, I'm kind of the opposite of you. I actually prefer non-perfect information games. And I think we've kind of talked about this, but to this podcast, I want like to go more in detail. Like with chess or person games, right? Chess or
Hmm.
Connect 4 or Connect 5 on the Go board, or even the Go board itself,
Hmm.
right? Those are perfect information games still, right? But as soon as you add in a third person to the game, like if you think of a Connect 4, like I guess 3 person or 4 person way of playing is Pente. It's like
Hmm.
Connect 5 with 4 people, right? And so as soon as like it's interesting because like with 2 people, it's a perfect information game. You're just trying to out strategize your opponent. But once you add in a third person, it just completely throws everything into randomness. Like the nature of the game changes. And I guess perfect information games, when I play them, I feel very constrained. It's like, oh, like Alan's gonna outsmart me anyways, right? But with like non-perfect information games, you can kind of like make alliances, kind of like there's that goal, right? Like for Pente, it's to connect 5 in a row.
Hmm.
But if someone's ahead, the other 2 might go like, well, Alan's looking like he's about to win. Why don't we, And that aspect of, I don't know, something about that is more like relatable to life for me. And it's kind of like how to deal with people in a way, and that's the game I prefer. But what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think definitely that's a completely different type of game. Actually, when you were talking, I was thinking about, does that still qualify as perfect information? Because it technically doesn't break any of the rules I described. In that, you still have the complete knowledge of the entire state of the game, and there's no randomness involved in your 4 player Connect 5. But definitely, I know exactly what you mean when you say the strategy is completely different, because I
Mm.
remember playing that with some people, and essentially, like, you can't like outthink other people, because for every one move you get, there are 3 people to block you. So, like, for example, if their goal was to stop you from winning, that's like way, way, way too easy for them to do. Like, you can't like
Mm,
be like, oh, I'm gonna make like a 300 IQ play, and
there
then
you
like
go.
even if all of them block me, I win. That's just not physically possible. So
Mm,
it becomes less so about your own strategizing and more so about dealing with others, kind of like you said, forming
right.
alliances. And that's the type of thing that, like, in game form, I have not interacted much with, but I think in the real world, it's probably a lot more prevalent to see like multiple factors in play, and like you yourself can't, out of your own like strategizing and willpower, be able to accomplish maybe some grand goal. Maybe you need some other people involved.
Right. And it's that weird like balance of power thing to it. Once you can't like look like you're winning in the beginning because otherwise that distracts everyone else to focus on you. Like everyone wants to take down the first person, right? And
Mhm.
so you almost want to like not be ahead, or you want to, it's like blitzkrieg real quick, like a sudden winning move. You can't like drag it out, otherwise the balancing powers will neutralize you in a way.
Mhm.
So that's always something I found interesting. I guess this kind of goes into philosophy a bit, because with like the games you like to play, Go and chess, right? The perfect
Mhm.
information. It's just between you and that other person, right? It's kind of like comp sci in a way. There's no external factors, right? In a pure like academic setting, it's just you and the code, right? Just
Mhm.
you thinking it through, and you what you write is what you get, right? But with like I guess philosophy, which is I guess math, some parts of math, the logic is still rooted in philosophy, but like philosophy about like meaning of life, or like how people interact, or truth, these things, right? It's like it changes. It's not constant, you know,
Mhm.
and it's sometimes not rational, like logic, like math builds on itself. Like philosophy, sometimes it tears itself down. What we held as true in the 1700s, now in our society, it's like, oh, it's what old white men think. So dismiss, is that a good thing, bad thing, right? They could go into debates about. But I think the analogy I used was math is kind of like Legos. You build with it, right? You can
Mhm.
comp sci too, you build it with it. But philosophy is like Play-Doh. You can build with it, but you could just reform it at another point. And that kind of frustrates you, doesn't it? With philosophy. That's why you prefer math, kind of.
I would say if what frustrates me a little bit, I wouldn't say frustrates is the correct word. I
Mm,
would say I would prefer to deal with subjects that are more concrete, that, given some set of axioms or rules, you kind of do what you want with them. And essentially, like, you can be proven right or wrong. For chess, if there's like a puzzle and I say, this is my answer, and then you say, no, 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 Alan, you're full of nonsense. Like, how can that be the correct answer? If we want to find who's right, who's wrong, we say, okay, why don't we just play it out on the board then? I'll play my solution. You try to show me why it's wrong. And
mm,
if I checkmate you, then I'm right. Otherwise, I'm wrong. But for
mm,
philosophy, for a lot of these more mushy subjects, you can argue back and forth like every single day. Maybe like I was right in the 1700s, you're right in the 1800s, and now I'm right again. But it's kind of like you said, like it's like Plato. It's a lot more mushy, and due to that, I dislike. It's not something that I could study for an extended period of time. Like I think we were talking about, free will. Does it exist? What does it even mean to have free will? That's the
mm,
type of thing where like it's hard to get a definite answer, and due to that like quality of the question itself, I don't think I particularly enjoy delving too deep into those types of questions.
understood. Right. Like the axioms that you like, it's like the Lego blocks, It's just
Mhm,
you have to have some truth to start with, and that's the Lego block. You build with
mhm,
that. Right. Plato, it's like I can make it a Lego block. I can make it half a Lego block. Heck, I can make it a circle block. It's like
yeah.
there's like almost like, yes, there's axiomatic philosophy, but there's also philosophy where like seems like it's constantly shifting in a way.
Mhm,
And I think in the beginning with the Enlightenment, what happened was that people thought language, like it's too mushy, right? It's kind of like
mhm,
Play-Doh, like it's not what it's like words themselves, they could be like substituted and have different meanings and things like the English language. I think maybe you get frustrated with this writing essays. It's like you just want to get a point across, right? But then using different words or whatnot is somehow it improves the quality of writing. But with
mhm,
math, I think what they were trying to do with like, even if you think of like, I'm thinking of calculus right now. Position, velocity, acceleration, right? Those words didn't exist before. Like I think Newton was the one who defined these things and is like, this is the rigorous system we're going to use. And so
mhm,
this is truth, right? And so
mhm.
that's you can't substitute in position for I guess what's another word, English synonym for position?
Um,
We're both bad here. Location,
Location, yeah.
right? That's no, 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 no. You can't do that, right? Position is position, and we define it to be where the point is, right? Can't use
Mhm,
location there, right? Because that can mean something different entirely. And so I think that was the thinking behind the basis of math during the Enlightenment. It's trying to create this rigorous truth system, right? Whereas like in social studies or history, sometimes we hold two things that are not true to be true at the same time. It's kind of weird. I don't know what you think about
yeah, I
that.
think definitely that's the thing with English. It's like I think there's always two aspects of play when you're trying to say something in English. Is like what you're trying to get across. That's one. And then two is how you say it. And so in English, how you say something actually matters a whole lot, which is why like for essays, you have to revise and revise and revise and revise. And sometimes, if you just want to get across one basic idea, um, and you're just trying to like reword how you actually approach that idea, kind of like come at it from all different angles. It's not like math, or like if you want to get across one idea, there's essentially one way to do it, maybe a few ways to do it, but in essence they're all identical in nature.
Hmm.
You have like some formula. Let's say your F
Pythagorean
equals
formula.
ma,
Oh, okay.
the force equals mass times acceleration. You can also bring over the m and then say F over m is equal to a. they express the
Mm,
same. They're different formulas. They're expressed in different ways, but they both say the same thing. For English, there's no such like core concept as that. Like F equals ma, the core concept is just the relationship between force, mass, and acceleration. And no matter how you express it, like no matter how you do the algebra, like that's the single core concept. If I want to express an idea, let's say I think Russia is the bad guy in the war, right?
oh, here we
There's
go.
like
Yeah.
a million different ways to express that, to come at that, and I feel like that's the difference. Yeah,
Mm,
not like good or bad, but definitely I prefer working with less ambiguous stuff.
agree. Yeah. Well, I see where you're going, but I can't say I completely agree because
Mhm,
for me, like there's some things that math just doesn't satisfy or it doesn't answer certain questions in life. And I don't know if it's because we're not there yet or it's just something that can never be answered. Kind of like human love,
mhm.
like can we find something eventually that explains love through math, through logic, or is love and logic just like two? And this kind of goes into philosophy, right? I think this is why philosophy is sometimes more attractive to people because
Mhm.
it's like math kind of seems dry. It's already like it's just logic based, but some things are like emotion based, and that's I don't know.
Yeah, I think I would agree with you. I don't know if this is the point you're making, but I would agree with you that math will probably never be able to explain any type of like abstract concept like love. It's mainly all meant to, have a representation of how how things work. And when I say how things work, like physics, um, you have like economics,
Mm,
you have computer science, like how these fields work, where a lot of them deal with just numbers, deal with some concepts, how some interpretations of these numbers. But for things that are like more mushy, like by
mm,
definition, like you can't really uh, come at that from a math perspective.
understood. Because I think with math too, like when I was doing homework and you were helping me out, you were able to kind of understand the symbols or whatnot. So even though you hadn't
Mhm.
done it in a while, like you immediately can start reading like this to me it was like hieroglyphics, right? But like for you, you're like, oh, like this, and you kind of understand that system you're in. Do you know what
Mhm.
I mean? And you could kind of, I don't know, maybe you pull something up from Wikipedia and some complicated formula and kind of just slowly break it down. But like me, I guess I'm just not gifted in that sense. But something that I guess bothers me is like these days, discourse, especially
Mhm.
political discourse. It's very messy. There
Mm.
seems to be like extreme divisiveness, right?
Agreed.
Both sides like two different starting narratives, and it's like unbridgeable almost. So I'm trying to find like a logical way to kind of bridge the two, but it's of course it can't be like completely like math, like logic proof. And
Mhm.
so the way I described it to you, I think, was type 1 and type 2 error in stats,
Mhm.
right? You have two different normal curves or two different ways of thinking. Type 1 error is you reject the null, but the null is true.
Mhm.
Type 2 error is the null is false, but you fail to reject. That type 1, type 2 error, it kind of points out that yes, we have a way of thinking. It's not always correct though.
Mhm.
So like a practical example I think would be like and this might be controversial, but like the George Floyd protests,
Mhm.
right? Should George Floyd have been killed? No, I don't think so, right?
Mhm.
Were all the riots that afterwards occurred good? I don't think so either,
Mhm.
right? Should we defund the police because of that? I certainly don't think so, right? But what I think is that it's almost like now with especially defund the police, there's a group of people who believe it should happen, right? And another group of people who think it's completely bonkers, and there's just no bridge in between, right? And so I guess for me, my normal curve is like police are there to keep enforce the law, right? Does that mean they're good all the time? No. That's where the type 1 and type 2 error come in,
Mhm,
right? But should we just say the police is bad? Well, then you've switched the curves, you know what I mean?
mhm.
I don't know what you think about that.
I think that's interesting. I thought about it when you first told me about this new paradigm. I'm trying to apply it to the police example. So type one is you conclude, you fail to reject the null hypothesis. Essentially, you, I would say, accept, even though you're not supposed to accept the null hypothesis, but you weren't supposed to. So in this case, let's say the null hypothesis is the police
Or a
are
force of good.
are a force of good. So a type one error in this case would be you think the police are a force of good, except maybe, for example, in the George Floyd case, they are not. So maybe you take the opposite of defund the police stance. You're like, oh, we should, fund the police a lot, give them all the funding in the world, shut down all the riots. What type
Yes,
of
right.
downsides would that bring? Then you would cause a type one error where even some of the bad eggs, they would perhaps um, do some bad things
The police
as
get
police. They
away
have,
with
yeah, they get
corruption.
away with corruption, abuse of power. That's our type one
And
error.
some people who are genuinely there to protest, they could be arrested for, I guess, not no reason, right?
Yeah. So that's the negatives of the type one error. Now thinking on the
Yes.
other side, type two error is when you reject, but you're not supposed to. So you reject the null hypothesis. In this case, sorry, what was the null hypothesis? It was police are good, right?
Police are a force of good, right?
So you reject that. You think, okay, police are bad. We're gonna have
We
to
need to
defund the
defund the
police. They
police.
get zero funding. There's going to be no more policemen ever again in this world. We're going to protest the George Floyd
Yeah, we're gonna
murder
have community
until,
safety groups, right?
uh,
Psychologists come to help out domestic violence scenes, things like that.
and then perhaps the consequences of that error going on the extremes is that there's going to be an increase in crime. If there are no police to stop me from robbing this mall,
Mm,
why should I not rob the mall? I want this bag, I want this
hmm.
jacket. If there are no police out there, let me just take it and run, and nobody's going to catch me. Yeah, I like that paradigm actually. Essentially, we balance these two extremes and then find some middle point where we minimize the consequences of both type one errors and type two errors. Because as you
Mm,
said, like you can't do both. Like a lot of
right.
these people, if they say defund the police, blah, blah, they're essentially arguing we don't want any type two errors, except you can't do that. Same for the other extreme. You can't argue like we don't want any type one errors. That's terrible because then you're going to be left with type two errors. Either way, you're going to be left with some. It's all about finding the balance and minimizing enough type one errors and enough type two errors such that it's not it does not neither side goes to the extreme. So
Mm.
um
The problem with type 1 and type 2 errors is that sometimes increasing one decreases the other, and decreasing the other increases
yeah,
the
I
other.
think yeah, I think that's kind of
The dilemma.
the dilemma. It's that you can never zero out both entirely unless you have a completely foolproof system. So when discussing these topics, we can only talk about what's the correct balance point between these.
Right.
um,
And I think we're missing that as a nation these days because we're
mhm,
always talking at these two extremes. We're always talking
exactly.
about the errors rather than what the system should be. And
Exactly. And
so
then the
that's
extremists are always pointing at the errors of the other side. I'm
right.
saying, hey, look at all your type one errors. Like, look at all the havoc it's causing. And you're saying, oh, hey, look at all the
Look at all
type
your
two
type 2
errors.
errors that you're causing. Right. And so it's just substituting type 1 and type 2 errors with political rhetoric then,
Mhm.
right? And so that's my way of kind of, I don't know if it's a logical way to view the world. I'm trying to be as like logical as possible, but it's like in a world where we live in, we can't completely foolproof logic system. So I guess we introduce probability and all that into it. And so stats, I think that's kind of like my statistical way of
Mhm.
thinking. Do you have a way of viewing the world, or is this your new way of viewing the world, I
I,
guess?
I think like I like the idea. I never was the type to really try to rationalize from a more logical, mathematical, rigorous perspective the things of the world. I kind of, like just use like regular people logic. It's just like, okay, like George Floyd, he was like killed for not really doing anything wrong. That's it's a bad thing. That's
Mm,
the type of logic I use. There's really no, I guess, math or any type of really, really formal logic involved.
mm,
So I think this is actually one of the first times I was introduced to kind of a logical way to look at balancing the two extremes. So I like the idea for sure.
gotcha. Well, we both grew up in a Christian environment, I guess. In my first podcast with you, I mentioned that we grew up like playing capture the flag football, and
Mhm.
then in meetings together. How does faith play any consideration in your like common person way of thinking? Because I think many Americans, they have a Christian background,
Mhm.
right? How much of that, to that degree, that their Christian background affects their rationality or how they view the world and how they act? That depends on each person. But for you, like, how does faith fit into, I guess, logic, rationality, and your way of viewing life?
Mm. I would say there's the two endpoints, which is like one is faith, the other is complete. I would just say like evidence. I make them sound like extremes. They're not entirely extremes, but
Mm,
you can probably see that like faith is believing something without needing the entire proof written out in front of you,
right.
and then evidence, or what some people would say rationality is is that you have all the proof in front of you.
Mm,
um, and for me, like I've always been a more rational type person, but
mm,
that doesn't mean that faith didn't play a role in me growing up. And what I mean by that is, for any type of phenomenon that you see in nature or anywhere, you can never actually get the full proof or reasoning behind why something happens. Um, for example, how did life come about on Earth? You can have theories, for example, theory of evolution,
mm,
and they can be rational, as in like each step can follow from the previous,
mm,
but they're not. You can never have something that's infallible.
right.
The same way, like you can say math is infallible because you can have these axioms and they all just build, 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 build. Or
Right.
CS, you have like these zeros and ones, and you build, 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 and you get this like
Mm-hmm.
Java program that does the same exact thing every time. But
Mm,
for phenomenon, a lot of scientific phenomenon, like you have to have faith in some of the gaps in logic. And
mm,
so for me, like, a lot of the things I learned in school, I agree with because they're rational. But at the same time, I think church has definitely also taught me that you can't like have the proof laid out for you everywhere every time,
mm.
because that's sometimes not possible. Sometimes you have to take it to faith, and just leave it at that.
What would be an example then of taking it to faith? Because like for the evidence-based thing, you gave the example of theory of evolution, right? It's a good theory, right? I mean, it's you can explain it step by step and how we got here, but it's not infallible,
Mhm.
right? How about faith? What life example is there then?
Um, Actually, let me ask a clarifying question. When you say faith, do you mean like faith in, say, God, um, or some like higher level being, or just like a more general like faith where like I don't have the proof, I just like have faith that it's
Yeah,
true.
that more general type of faith.
More general type of faith. Okay. I'm going to give an example that might sound a little bit extreme, but the earth being round. I know we've all heard of the flat earthers,
Uh-huh.
people saying, oh, earth is flat. And then a lot, generally be like, you just brush them off like, oh, ridiculous. How
Mm,
can you not know the earth is round? Like
mm.
you have all this like evidence,
Right.
images, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. For me, I can't say me knowing the earth is round is due to evidence because I have no evidence. I have faith that the evidence presented to me is not
Mm,
counterfeit, that no one's faking it. Like I personally have never done any experiments that the earth is round.
gotcha.
And I can't confirm it. Some people actually, the strangest thing is that like some people will say that, oh, how can you not know the earth is round? Have you been on an airplane? But the thing is, from an airplane, the curvature of the earth is for pretty much like for all sake, and it's like indistinguishable. The
Mm,
earth looks flat from an airplane. Or
mm-hmm.
like if you see it, it's confirmation bias. You see some like tiny curvature, like, oh, I knew the earth was round. But it's
Uh-huh.
actually you can do the math. You can have a diagram of the earth, have the height of the airplane, and then see essentially what your field of view is. And it's like really, really small. It's like probably like 0.1% of the earth, which is like extremely, extremely
Mm,
flat. And so a lot of people thinking like, oh, I can reason out that the earth is round. Like I've been on an airplane. A
mm,
lot of them are also just falling to confirmation bias where like you think you're rationalizing, but it's also faith that you have in the system. Like I think the earth is round due to the faith I have in NASA, due to the faith I have in the world that like you literally just can't have everyone just in on this flat earth,
mm.
the round earth idea if the earth were actually flat. So that's something I would say I chalk up the faith. I have no idea whether the earth is round or not, but because everyone says it's round, because I feel like it'd be way too big of a cover up to like cover up the fact that like the earth is flat, I believe the earth is round. So
You
that's my
remember like there
example.
was something you learned in, I forgot what it's called, some geometry class,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where like if you walk 100 miles in a certain direction, turn a right angle, and then walk a certain direction, and then turn a right angle again, and then walk 100 miles, you get back to your starting point.
Mm-hmm.
And that shouldn't make sense because if you walk in a triangle has 180 degrees,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so if you turn 90 degrees, 90 degrees, and 90 degrees, that's 270 degrees, right? And the only reason it works is because Earth is not flat, right?
Yes, you're right.
Right.
This is a differential geometry concept. I want to like, I guess,
Crash
explain it,
course. Go.
crash course it.
Uh-huh.
So we all know in geometry that the sum of the three angles in a triangle is 180 degrees. But that is in flat geometry. That is in Euclidean geometry. That's the word for it.
2D, two-dimensional.
Two-dimensional. But in geometry that's not flat, for example, when the surface is that of a sphere, you can start at the equator, walk all the way up to the North Pole, turn 90 degrees, walk down to the equator again, because if you're at the North Pole, even if you turn 90 degrees and walk, you're still going to reach the equator eventually.
Right.
Turn 90 degrees. So now before you hit the equator at a perpendicular angle, you turn 90 degrees, walk back to your starting point. And then you're 90 degrees from going back up to the North Pole. So equator, 90 degrees, North Pole, 90 degrees, equator, 90 degrees, and back. So that's a triangle with three right angles, essentially. And what I was saying to you earlier was that like, yeah, essentially geometry in a 2D Euclidean space is different than geometry on a spherical surface. And if someone wanted to do that experiment, you just do it on a globe, 90 degrees, 90 degrees, 90 degrees, ta-da.
Uh-huh.
The globe is not flat. If you wanted to do
Right.
that on Earth, you would need a ton of resources.
Yeah.
I
You
have
have to take a
not,
trek.
yeah, I have not conducted that experiment, so I don't have that proof, but I have faith that that will be the case if I did spend like 6 months trying to do that experiment.
Right. I think it'd take more than 6 months because you got to get the icebreaker ships to get to the
Oh
North
yeah,
Pole, right? You got to trek the North Pole or Antarctica if you want. I mean, whatever you
yeah.
prefer. Probably go the ocean and then whatnot. So it would be a complicated trip to say the least.
Mhm.
But then I think I forgot whether it was you or Chris. You were like, "What if we did this experiment and it didn't work?" Right? And then it's like, what would your reaction be? And then I was like, I would just look at you guys and go like, are you guys sure? Like this is what happened, right?
Yeah.
And then I want to do it again to just make sure like we didn't mess up. But then if we do it again and it's the same results, then would you start doubting that the Earth is round? What do you think about that?
Um, I think that was for the other experiment we were talking about. We are talking about going on just like seeing the time of the sunset from like two different elevations, one close to the ground, one like really high above the ground. And in
Yes.
theory, the one very high above the ground would have a later sunset time. And then you could, draw out the diagram of the Earth, the two elevation points, the tangent line going to the sun, and then figure out like, okay, this matches what we've learned. But if that didn't work, yeah, you probably confirm it a few more times, and then if it really, really doesn't work, probably get a little bit suspicious. Ask an expert like, hey, I did this experiment. Let me like, for example, let me record it. I have the proof that the sun sets the same exact time, regardless whether you're at ground level or you're like, let's say like 500 meters above the ground. Like, what's up with this? Yeah, I
Right.
don't know. It'd be like kind of stunning.
It's kind of like a Matrix scene, you know? It's like you figure out like something you believed in for so long is actually not true. You know
Mhm.
what I mean? And it's just like that whoa moment. I don't know quite know how to describe it, but
Yeah.
something you said about faith and I guess empirical need evidence. You
Mhm.
kind of talk about them as opposites, but you also say that they're not usually like just complete opposites, like just on different sides of the scale. Would you see faith and empiricism extremes as type 1 and type 2 error, and then the best way is to be in the middle?
Yeah, I would say so. For example, you can say the null hypothesis is you should always, always, always require evidence for anything that you believe.
Mm.
Um, and then the the error, if you let's say you, I always have to think about this for a long time before getting this straight.
Mm.
Let's say you accept that, or you fail to reject, whatever, you accept that hypothesis, you're going to be able to come to very, very few conclusions because there's just too much that we don't know. Like the things you learn in science class, they're not built from pure evidence. They're built from, or even if they are, it's not all presented to you. Like it's this type of essentially they're taking all the evidence of like the tons of experiments they've done and kind of condensing it
Mm.
into an explanation that makes sense. But the thing is, just because it makes sense doesn't mean it suffices to provide um, evidence that this is true for sure. Like you can't guarantee that this is true for sure. For example, like the earth being round, like I can provide the evidence, but you would have to actually see for yourself, experiment for yourself to know for a complete 100% fact. And
Mm.
obviously, no one really cares enough to actually go about conducting these experiments.
Mm.
Generally, we just chalk it up to the fact that, like, hey, we can't have like billions of people trying to cover up like a flat earth. That's just unrealistic.
Mm,
But at the end of the day, if you require absolute evidence for everything, then you can't really come to any conclusions. And if you chalk everything up to faith, then you're going to be susceptible to a lot of conspiracy theories, fake news. So I think, yeah, definitely. If we consider one end of the spectrum a type 1 error, the other end a type 2 error, you got to find that balance.
right. The thing with like, I think you hit it pretty good. Like with empiricism, there's even you have to have faith in the empirical methods you
Mhm.
use, right? And so that itself is like the faith in scientific method, that through replication, if you can replicate something enough times and it's like that, then that's true, right? You have faith in that's the case. Maybe, I don't know, the 101st time you do it, it doesn't turn out the way you think it is. Then it's like, what the heck, right? But with like faith, this is something like I struggle right now in church too. It's like, what's the right amount? What actually, how do you, like you said, the danger of faith is you susceptible to fake news, conspiracy theories, things like
Mhm.
that, right? But also something like, I think we've talked about this before, the objective versus subjective beliefs that we
Mhm.
hold, right? So for an example, church says, and some people might find this controversial, right? God's eternal purpose is to make man the same as he is in life and nature, right? But not in the Godhead. We've heard that a lot in our church, right? It's an objective fact in our church
Mhm.
because by faith, I guess we kind of believe that. But did we subjectively accept that in faith? Do you know what I mean?
Mhm.
So at what point do we like, can we not give something more faith? It's like, no, this is too nuts. Like, this is like the thing with, like, not saying our church is a cult, but like, how do you get out of a cult? Do you know what I mean? Because it's like the people around you, they're all doing something, and then you personally, like, you don't feel like it's right, but like, since everyone around you believes in it, it's like, I guess this enters in sociology, right? Group behavior. You just start doing it too because peer pressure, mob mentality, right? So I guess my question is, what's the line you draw for faith?
Um, I would say I would actually draw a distinction. I would say I would separate out church faith as being like a little bit different from the more general faith that
Mm,
I've talked about before. For the more general faith, I would say like when it's not possible or too inconvenient to gain more comprehensive proof, then chalk it up to faith. I would say for church, kind of the whole foundation is like faith based, and so it's hard to it's hard to draw a line because if you start taking away like the faith, then essentially like you find that like really quickly you're left with nothing because a lot of it's like the foundation.
mm.
God created the world. God like died
Came
for
to save
us.
man, right?
Yeah, it's like if you take away some of the faith, then you're essentially left with nothing. So I would say that it's kind of up to like you, the individual. Like, do you take um, our teachings? And this applies for like our whole range of teachings. You can maybe like pick and choose. Like, you take this to faith, or do you take that to faith? Maybe this thing you think is like, oh, this is like too ridiculous. I can't accept this.
Mm.
But I think that's how I view it, at least.
I think that's a good way of viewing it. That's kind of how I think you put it. You kind of put into words my thoughts that don't even exist yet. It's
Mhm.
like, because you say that if you take away a little bit of faith, then actually the whole structure really falls apart, right?
Mhm.
It's like the foundation in which faith is foundation of Christians, and I guess it's all over the Bible too, right? But some things, like, and then we were kind of talking about this yesterday. There's some passages that are kind of like a little out there,
Mhm.
like I think you shared something talking about the foundation, right? Talking about oneness, priesthoods, kingship. But it's one of the things it says is our foundation is nothing but Christ. Yes, we
Mhm.
take the ground of the church, but we are not for the ground. The ground is for the foundation, and the foundation is Christ and Christ alone, right? If you think about it, that's pretty radical. Our foundation is nothing but Christ, you know?
Mhm.
But like, I guess in a abstract realm, like you could just take it or not take it, right? It doesn't really matter. But my fear is that in the application of it, it could become something extreme, right? How do you not cause something to be extreme like that? You know what I mean?
Hmm. I think like I don't know. It's always up to like the individual on like where
Mm,
to draw the line. I think for me, how do I say this? Like I have a relatively high tolerance of, I guess to be blunt, like I have a I have a high tolerance of like BS. Like if I think like it doesn't really, it's like not entirely right, I can like think that, but then still like listen to like an entire message about it and be like, okay, I think it's probably some of it was a bit of a stretch,
mm,
but whatever. I think some people, I think maybe like you have like a little bit of a lower tolerance. It's like if it's not
for
right, then like
BS.
it's like, oh, like
You're
why is
funny.
this why is this not right? Like I don't think what they said was entirely right. And then you try to search for where it's not right, and then yeah, but I think for me, the reason why like I haven't actually I guess gone into that much questioning is because, yeah, like I said, I don't know if that's the right way to put it, but that's the only way that I could express it.
I think that's a good way of expressing things. It's like I think it has to do with like human behavior, kind of, like you said, individually too. It's like in a group setting. It's what's that experiment? Milgram's experiment, you know, where they put a person in an experimental room and then someone else in a different room, and then like the let's say you were the person with the experimenter. Let me say it's Joseph, because Joseph's kind of like diabolical sometimes, right?
Mhm,
And Joseph's like, push the button, right? And you push the button and you hear the person scream from the other room, right?
mhm,
And then Joseph's like, turn up the power and push it again. And then you do it again. You listen to the authority and you do it again, right?
mhm,
And then the person screams even louder. And then Joseph's like, all right, turn it up again. And then you start feeling like, wait, someone's getting hurt by my actions. I need to stop, right? But
mhm,
then Joseph's like, do it, Alan, or you're gonna end the experiment. You won't get the cash you came in here for. And so
mhm,
you either do it or you don't, right? And that kind of like most people, I think, kept on turning up the power until the person on the other side, quote, quote, died, right? It
mhm,
was too much of a shock, right? And so I guess that kind of speaks to like people's obedience to authority rather than like, how do you describe like, is it morals? I don't know if it's morals or like ethics. It's like, no, I'm not gonna keep pressing the button because this is not going well. I guess it's what you described as like your tolerance of BS.
mhm,
I mean, I don't know. That just reminded me of Milgram's experiment, because it's like you sit in a room, people are speaking something, it's complete BS, but you you're like, okay, you know, it doesn't pertain to me, so I'm just gonna keep going. I mean, it doesn't affect me
mhm,
now, so it's okay. But for me, it's like I don't know why I'm like not tolerant to BS. You know, it's like because it frustrates me kind of. Like I think you and we've both thought about whether to go for higher ed or not, right? I have a
mhm,
lot of pressure from mom. Like she's like, you know, to have a better chance of finding a nice spouse, or just to be have a better salary, you know,
mhm,
and to feel more fulfilled, you should go get higher education, right? A master's at
mhm,
least. And so, but I'm just tired of education in a way. I
mhm,
kind of not like you in that like you're really good at math. You're very good at logic. You excelled in the classes. I didn't. I struggled a lot in STEM courses. History is another story, but I don't see myself going into history that much. And
mhm,
so, but you see a lot of people in our age, they're going for higher education. right? And so I guess the question we kind of ask ourselves is, should everyone, like, if you have an opportunity, should you go for a PhD or not? So I
Hmm.
just kind of want to hear what you think about that.
I think for me personally, the reasons why I might go for higher education sometime in the future are actually very, very different than the common reasons given. For example, what you said, getting a better job, the prestige, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Because the reason being is that like I'm pretty happy with where I am now in terms of like I guess income. I rather minimalistic. I'd say like I'm not looking to get a PhD and then get like a job that pays like ridiculously well.
Mm,
So for me, it's also not as much about the prestige because like you can say that like okay like for my master's for my job now that provides me like a decent amount of prestige, but for me it's that like kind of what you said. It's like I'm more inclined to doing a PhD versus working for the rest of my life. Because
mm,
if I were to choose the type of work that I do, I would rank PhD as higher than like just working for like some company and like improving their website, improving some of their backend processes. Um, it's like I feel like I can maybe explore some area that I haven't explored with a PhD. And so for me, that's the reasoning. I think the reasoning that like a lot of people give, like, oh, get a nicer job with a nicer salary, it's more prestige. Um, you said like easier to find a spouse. Actually, I don't know how. Maybe,
it's part of the prestige,
maybe
you're
part of
well
the prestige.
educated,
Yeah,
social class, right? You're a
social
doctor.
class.
People have to call you Dr. Huang. They keep, yeah, it's not Mr. Huang, it's Dr. Huang, right?
Yeah, yeah. I would say that those are actually, it's like hard to push through a PhD with just those like surface
Mm,
level, somewhat shallow reasons because it's like it's long, 5 years. That's a big chunk of your life.
right. You got to know what you're dedicating yourself to. And I'm just
For
not up
sure.
for that for right now.
Yeah.
Maybe some life event will change how I do things or my view on life, but I just don't have that motivation. And I don't want these things to motivate you because like they're kind of fake in a way. Those aren't things that those aren't the reasons for getting higher education, right? Higher education is kind of like what you want to learn more, you feel unfulfilled, like mentally. Not to say that what you're doing is not mentally fulfilling or like it's not good or it's not helpful or it doesn't require the degree you have, but it's like you're kind of more like an academic type, right? You want
Mm-hmm.
to understand or solve problems that normal people or people who don't have a PhD can't solve, right? And so I think those are the people who should get a PhD. But there's a
Mm-hmm.
current push to just, no matter who you are, higher ed is always good. Like, do it, get the degree now, ask questions later. It's I kind of feel that way. And I don't know, what do you think? What, good, bad for society?
Yeah, I think it's definitely not healthy for people to be pushed into a PhD or any type of higher degree. Because it's like it's essentially yeah, it's all for the. Well, I feel like for a lot of people, it is all for the prestige, and I think that's probably yeah, probably not very good. It's like if you're really like looking for like a higher paying job, et cetera. To be honest, I don't think that actually even is the route to go. At least for CS, I can say it's not the route to go. CS like industry experience matters a lot
Mm,
if you're at like just if you start at some like mid to low tier company, work there for a few years, jump to a more well-known company, jump to an even more well-known company, stick there for a few years, get promoted. Like that's the way to getting a better paying job
mm,
for CS. PhD is definitely not the way to go about that. But I think the push, so that's another reason why like the push for people to just do PhD is just like you said, PhD first, ask questions later is I would also disagree with that. I also
right.
think that like even though like I kind of want to get a PhD, I also feel like a tiny bit of push. Like Clayton's mom, like Joanna also has been telling me like, oh, I want to get a PhD. Like this is what you should be good at. And to some extent, I also agree, but It's
Because
like,
there's that biological clock aspect thing, right?
mm,
Once you get older, you get married, it's harder to finish the
yeah,
degree or even do anything outside of work. And your mind kind of, they say your mind not shuts down, but like you don't have as good of a mind as you do when you're younger. I get that. And so that's also the problem is like of not following the get degree first, ask questions later, because later you might not be able to get the degree anymore, right? That's the fear. But then it's like I still can't accept like the get degree now, ask questions later
mm,
mentality. You know what I
yeah.
mean? And so is this like, but then just thinking about it, it's like people are like, well, you're wasting your time. You're not getting the degree, and you're just wasting your time thinking. And so that's why guess I'm podcasting then. You know?
I guess the one question I want to ask you is,
Sure.
do you chase any of the benefits that getting the degree comes with? I guess it's probably a deeper question, and it's
Ooh,
probably more
that's a
personal to
good
you
question.
yourself. Like those things that they're hyping you up about, like, how much do you value them?
I guess salary wise, I'm kind of like you. 50K, that's quite like for ROTC. Like if you go into the army after college, right? I think they start by paying you 50,000 salary. And so to me, that's like, well, if I find a civilian job that also pays that amount, I'm pretty okay with that. You
Mm-hmm,
know, I think like starting wages, average wise, it's 60,000 or something. I'm
mm-hmm,
not sure the exact figure, but I'm not as ambitious. Maybe in high school I would have been ambitious, like I want that 100K job, but I don't know, college that kind of mellowed me out. Um, what do I get done on the job, right? What am I doing? I think that we talked about autonomy in the last podcast, right? Do I feel I'm a productive member of society? Am I helping the company go forward? I think that's important to me. So like if you gave me a job that paid 100K to just press a button or like send emails, I don't
mm-hmm,
know if I would take it, you know, because it's like day after day you're just sending emails. I don't know if there's a job like this, but like if you had good pay and like but the task was just pulling a lever, right? We use that example. I don't at this point I'm not like I wouldn't go for that. I guess some people who are financially like dire, they might just like whatever, it's just a job and they just pull the lever, right? And
mm-hmm,
get the money. Status, you know me, like I don't care about status, screw what other people think about me at this point. It's just the people I care, like you wouldn't judge me by the degree I held,
mm-hmm,
you know like so I mean status, but I guess in the back of my mind there's always that thought it's maybe mom has a point with like marriage at least,
mm-hmm,
like you meet more intellectual, I don't know even if it's intellectual people, but like people with higher degrees, I don't know if that makes a difference. Like to me right now it doesn't make a difference, like it shouldn't make a difference, like people can marriage shouldn't just be based on intellectual achievement. So I guess that it's kind of where I stand on the spouse part of things. Prestige. Like I wrote a senior thesis, I got first place for it for history department,
mm-hmm,
right? And then I got $1,000. My name's on the website for a year. Maybe now it's not even on it anymore since there's next year's graduates, right? And so that's it. And so if you do it for just the academic achievement, I felt kind of just empty after I got it. It's like, all right, after I graduate, no one cares anymore. Now whether people call you doctor or not, that I guess goes into the social thing again. It's like, well, I don't really care. Honestly, I kind of like the underdog story more. It's like people don't expect you to be good, but then you exceed their expectations. I always liked or wanted to be an underdog rather than this person who had it all to start with.
mm-hmm.
Maybe that's too idealistic, but that's just kind of how I think. Did that answer your question? I kind
I
of like
think
droned on for a
definitely.
bit.
I think like yeah, you kind of tackled each of the aspects of like what can a PhD provide me at the end after it's all done, and then how much I value those. And I think from what I gather, it's like not too much.
Right. Yeah. If
Mm,
I want a PhD, it's because I want to do something in that field.
mm,
So what I'm currently thinking is maybe psychology to kind of like really understand the human mind. With COVID, like there's a lot of kids out there who are just kind of lost. What
mm,
I hate the most is seeing a kid who has so much potential just staying on the couch and does not do
mm,
anything. It hurts me deep inside because I feel like you're younger than me. You have more years than me. You can do more for the world, but why? Why not? You know?
mm.
So that bothers me. So that's why I would go for a PhD in psych. My mom told me like get an MBA. It's like you're good at seeing big picture stuff. I'm like, Mom, that's not, you can't just go get an MBA because like you feel your son sees the bigger picture stuff, you know? That's like, plus like in stats we also like the stats professor, they really don't like MBAs because they feel they're very surface level. They don't know like deep like how things are working, and that might screw up business. They point to the example of like Boeing. Like Boeing used to be like engineering oriented, but then they started like being more business oriented, and then they started having problems with their engines and whatnot. And so that's not good. And I didn't want to be part of the problem, but then my mom says I think too much. Stats and math I'm not good at, you know? It's like I got so much help from you during college. Thank you for that. But, you know, I'm just not naturally gifted in that. I just do it because I did stats because like I felt like you could dip your hand in a lot of different fields. You know, bio, you could do business, you can do psychology even, heck, right? Economics. You could dip your hands in a lot of different things. But then when you get into the theoretical stuff, it's out of my depth, I feel. And then history, I feel, is kind of like hijacked a bit by like topics I'm not really interested in, right? Or like social justice, like way of viewing history. I'm kind of more interested in political, grand narrative history, and that's kind of lost. Yeah, that's kind of where I am with a PhD in a nutshell. Yeah. Well, I guess we'll wrap up then. Podcast 2.2 for today.
Sounds
Thank
good.
you, Alan, for coming on, and I hope to do another podcast with you soon.
Sounds good. Yeah, thanks for having me again.
Okay, bye.
Bye.